you, Joe. It's a time for questions. So first of all, I want to ask a quick question to three speakers. Okay. So these days we have seen already thousands of high-rise buildings. Most of them are in China. So in your mind, do you believe how many years we still have to design this kind of exciting projects in China? In your mind? Yeah, personally, idea. I'm just interested about that.
Well, maybe I'll go first. It's an interesting thing I was going to show, didn't bring it. The cities has got denser and denser, right? The city of Hong Kong was just 4 or 5 stories, whatever, and now it's getting to 250 meters, 500 meters. I think the city will continue to be more compact and go higher. So I don't know when is the end. I think that will be the end of our human beings' existence. I just think we will get taller and taller. We have less and less land resources. You know, for countries like China, you have only 12% of agricultural land, and you have a lot of land that is not developable. So I think high-rise building will keep going, and they will go taller and taller.
我认为这个高层建筑至少还有。
I think at least there will be 50 years for the prosperity of high-rises.
How many years do you think we still have to build tall buildings?
Yeah, the idea is still focus on this kind of high-rise building.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. I thought, 50, yeah. I'm thinking 55. I don't know. I think that we know there are issues with high-rise buildings, but we have to solve those. And I don't think high-rise buildings on their own are the solution. I think a combination of high-rise buildings and low-rise buildings together would solve the problem. But I think it's going to be endless. So.
Okay, so let's take questions from other people. Do you have any questions? Okay.
I think this is a question for, is it Mr. Drew? With regard to that really lovely plan you drew, one thing was interesting to me, that the purpose of the plan had to do with healthcare, and in the plan, the healthcare seemed to be uniquely pushed into one area. I know that I saw some small distributions of it around, but I know it potentially has to be somewhat together, but it did seem to be not as centric to the plan as I would have expected.
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. We basically wanted to have the city with five districts, which we wanted by and large to be mixed use, but we figured that ultimately it was that we put the healthcare on the north, partly because of daylighting issues. We didn't want to mix it up with the rest of the buildings, but also it was more synergistic with some of the industry that we were also planning around there. But yeah, I mean, that was where the large healthcare campus would be. But we did also, maybe I didn't explain it very clearly, we had a kind of, on the east side of the city, and the eastern district was where the smaller industries would be, and they would be the industries that supported the healthcare facility. So yeah, the healthcare clinics themselves, I think you get the economy of scale if you put them all together, or as close together as you can, but some of the supporting infrastructure, that didn't need to be there, so it wasn't adjacent to them. I don't know if that answers your question.
Maybe a question for Mr. Drew. It's like an agropolis, farm-oriented city. How much reduction, the 100,000 population, how much reduction in individual carbon footprint? Because you're reducing the food miles, you're reducing the car usage, there must be a relative comparison to the existing cities today. Let's say the average carbon footprint of a resident in London or Manhattan compared to your visionary city. Maybe just percentage-wise.
I mean, that's a really good question. The truth is, I don't know how much, in terms of hard numbers, we would reduce somebody's individual carbon footprint by, but you're absolutely right. I mean, and I think you bring up a great point, which is food miles. it's like water footprint. It's becoming much more a widely accepted metric. We didn't study it, but what we did is we set targets for basically hard targets rather than percentage reductions, because I think as soon as you say, yeah, we want to reduce by a certain number over a code, and then the code changes, it's like a building that was 20% better than ASHRAE 90.1 2004 is probably only compliant now with ASHRAE 90.1 2010. You know, so we did set hard numbers, and that doesn't allow me to be able to answer your question, because we didn't benchmark what a typical carbon footprint for a person living in China would be. But I'll tell our guys to get on that.
A few remarks to Eileen and Chris' presentations. Great work, really astonishing. We never really believe what it's going to look like in the future. And I see some commonalities among your projects, as if like intentionally or unintentionally following a Lynchian imageability model, where you define a path, you define the edges, and then you go to a center where you've got major landmarks. However, some transportation analysis have critiqued this model by saying that it doesn't work well with vertical density, where we place most people in the center and then we take them out to the periphery. So it's really great load on transportation. And then in the same transportation scheme, like how are we infusing mass transit as really a major principle for sustainable city? So these like two together, the imageability that you are creating is fantastic, creating iconic skyline, but then how does it work with transportation? Other like minor remarks is like we have a concern about the local people if they are really engaged into the planning process, so they have a say that this is what we really envision the city to look like, the Chinese culture, the Chinese aesthetics, way of life. So that's kind of like integrated in the future city. And then the third thing, we mentioned that elderly population are increasingly important, but somehow throughout the entire conference, I haven't seen any single elderly person in the presentation, in the rendering at least. So all the renderings throughout the conference shows people must be like 20 years old or like 25 or 15. That's it. You cannot be older than that. So I mean, like, I'm surprised most of us probably here exceeds that 20 years old here, and we feel offended a little bit, sorry. So we would like to see ourselves how we will be living in the future. So probably that's the renderer mistake. It didn't really include elderly people. But that's like on the side, like in a way, are we really planning for that segment of the population? And if we are planning, how are we planning for that? Yeah, thank you so much in advance for answering.
We can just have a conversation, right?
I think we both use crystal rendering, right? Crystal obviously don't like old people.
Yeah, that's a very good reminder. I think we need to show diversity of figures in the rendering. I think he has a number of questions, like, if I get it right, how does the iconic skyline work with transit?
Right.
How do you engage the community of people in the planning process? How do we incorporate Chinese culture and Chinese aesthetic in the design? And then we talk about elderly people. So, well, I would do the iconic skyline because it's something very dear to our hearts. I think there's one thing is designing the iconic skyline, but in terms of incorporating transit, the transit in a very, very high density development area, especially workplaces, need to be well served by transit. So I think the challenge that many cities here face is there is the land planner who's doing, where the highest FAR and plot ratios are, and then there's the transportation process. But sometimes because of the spacing requirement and try to saving construction costs for transit lines, those lines and stations get moved off high density area, and that is the kind of integration that I think everybody's trying to work with. So that's one. You have something to add about transit?
No, not really. I mean, I just echo what you say, and obviously, as planning something like this, you have to take into account that trends might change as well. Everybody seems to say, well, we need to make large bicycle routes, but you don't see so many people on bicycles now. It seems to have gone down. Things might change and what have you, and so we have to be, I'd say, be adaptable for that.
Engaging people in the planning process?
Well, it is critical. I mean, people, as soon as people feel engaged, as soon as people feel a sense of ownership in something, they're more likely to be supportive of it for a start. Nobody likes somebody else making decisions for them. So, yeah, I mean, that's one of the, almost a cornerstone of sustainable, social sustainability in developing a new property. This, like I said, this particular project was a greenfield site, and regrettably, people would actually have to be relocated. But we did address that by providing basically discounted housing for them, trying to create opportunities for them to work and what have you. But in a other situation, yeah, engaging the local community is really important. And I think it's done though. Maybe not so much here, but it's certainly in projects in Europe and the United States. I mean, you have support groups from the local community who are completely involved in it. They sit on the local council and what have you.
I think it's interesting, our experience. I'm from San Francisco, so on one end in the San Francisco, we have just got a project that got approved. It's 150 acres, which is 50 hectares. We went through 5 years and 200 plus community meetings in working with community groups. What do they really want? From the very beginning, what we try to do, and vetting along the way until they have the support through the city council. We call the board of supervisors. In China, they are also changing. I think in many ways, the community engagement has to be effective when they are really aware of the consequences of the plan. So I think 15 years ago when I worked on a project in Shanghai, you walk around the area. If you do the community outreach then, the only building they want to save is a historical area. Some of you may have visited. It's Xintiandi here in Shanghai. So it's a very, now everybody treasures that historical fabric. But when I walk the site and I talk to the people there, they just want to save one brand new building because it's got modern sanitary, it has kitchen, it has no architectural character, and it has a air raid shelter in the basement. So if you go to visit Xintiandi now, that building is gone. That is a plaza that's full of people. So I think that time, the community engagement come from a different form. But today, I think many plans is posted online in China, and they get feedback. I know the project that we worked on in Guangzhou, they get feedback from the community, and the key issues, where are the substations located and where are the trash collector buildings located. They do not want to be in their neighborhood. So I think it's growing, it's changing, and as the community is more mature, they know what is shown to them, what is good, then the engagement will be more effective. So